The light show above Earth's moon was designed to be impossible to ignore. 3 ships from the Zalathi Confederation positioned themselves in perfect formation and began broadcasting on every frequency the humans used for communication. The energy patterns created colors that had never been seen in this system, and the mathematical precision of the display made it clear that this was not a natural phenomenon. Ambassador Crixval felt the familiar nervousness that came with first contact protocols. In his long career, he had initiated peaceful relations with dozens of species, but the humans presented unique challenges. Most primitive races were amazed by superior technology and grateful for guidance towards civilized behavior. The readings from the observation posts suggested these humans might be different. The response came faster than expected. Within hours, both human fleets had repositioned themselves to get better views of the alien vessels. Communications arrays that had been pointed at each other in preparation for battle were now focused on the visitors from beyond their system. The humans were curious rather than afraid, and their messages were polite rather than threatening. "Welcome to our system," came the transmission from the Colonial Alliance flagship. Commander Hayes spoke with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to dealing with unexpected situations. "We are honored by your presence and hope this can be the beginning of friendly relations between our peoples." General Walsh sent a similar message from the Martian fleet. "The Free Mars Coalition extends greetings to our visitors from the stars. We look forward to learning about your civilization and sharing knowledge that will benefit both our species." The Confederation delegation exchanged what would have been glances if they had all possessed eyes. The humans were responding exactly as civilized beings should respond to first contact. They were curious rather than hostile, and they spoke of friendship rather than conquest. Perhaps the weapons signatures had been misinterpreted, and these beings were more advanced than the preliminary observations had suggested. Crixval activated the translation systems and began the standard first contact speech that had worked successfully for over 1,000 cycles. "People of Earth and Mars, we come in peace as representatives of the Zalathi Confederation. We are an alliance of 12 species dedicated to cooperation and mutual prosperity. We have watched your development with great interest and believe you are ready to join the galactic community." The response was everything a diplomat could hope for. Both human factions expressed wonder and gratitude at the contact. They asked intelligent questions about the Confederation and its member species. They showed genuine interest in learning about galactic civilization and their place in the larger universe. Within days, formal meetings were arranged aboard the Confederation flagship. Colonel Ben Parker represented the Colonial Alliance, while Admiral Chloe Bennett spoke for the Free Mars Coalition. Both humans impressed the alien delegation with their intelligence and their grasp of complex political concepts. Dr. Elizabeth Grant served as Earth's chief negotiator, and her understanding of interspecies relations seemed almost instinctive. The humans toured the Confederation ships with enthusiasm that reminded Crixval of children discovering new toys. They asked detailed questions about the technology and showed particular interest in the peaceful resolution methods that had kept the galaxy stable for centuries. Captain Morrison joined the tours when his exploration duties allowed, and Dr. Carter took extensive notes about alien biology and culture. After a week of cultural exchange and friendly conversation, Ambassador Crixval felt confident enough to address the obvious problem. The two human factions were still pointing weapons at each other across the asteroid belt, and the rhetoric about mining rights was getting stronger rather than weaker. It was time for proper diplomatic intervention. "We have observed the dispute between your two groups," Crixval began during a formal meeting in the conference chamber of his ship. "The Confederation has extensive experience in resolving resource conflicts, and we would be honored to mediate a peaceful solution." Zach 9 provided detailed charts showing how similar disputes had been resolved in the past. The 50-cycle war between the methane breathers and the silicon shapers had ended when both sides accepted Confederation mediation. The resource-sharing agreements had made both species more prosperous than they could have been fighting over scraps. Harmonic 7th sang a complex melody that translated into a comprehensive proposal for asteroid mining cooperation. Joint operations would be more efficient than separate efforts, and shared technology would advance both human factions faster than competition ever could. The plan was elegant and fair and would eliminate the need for any conflict. The silence that followed was longer than expected. Colonel Parker and Admiral Bennett exchanged looks that seemed to carry entire conversations. Dr. Grant studied the proposals with the attention of someone examining a fascinating but incomprehensible artifact. When they finally responded, it was with voices that were respectful but firm. "We appreciate this offer more than we can express," said Admiral Bennett. "The Confederation's experience and wisdom could certainly help us find solutions we might not discover on our own. But this particular matter needs to be resolved between humans alone." Colonel Parker nodded agreement. "We understand that our conflict seems wasteful and primitive to observers who have achieved galactic peace. But some things must be decided by our own people using our own methods. We hope you can respect our choice to handle this internally." Dr. Grant leaned forward with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a confused child. "This dispute is not really about asteroid mining rights. It is about establishing relationships and testing boundaries and determining how far each side is willing to go for what they believe in. No outside mediation can accomplish those goals for us." The Confederation delegation stared at the humans in complete bewilderment. Crixval had never encountered a species that rejected obvious solutions to their problems. The humans were clearly intelligent and they understood the benefits of cooperation. They had welcomed alien contact and expressed genuine interest in joining galactic civilization. But they were politely declining the most basic service the Confederation could provide. "You are choosing conflict over cooperation," said Zach 9, in a voice that carried overtones of disbelief. "You are selecting the difficult path when an easy one has been offered." "We are choosing to solve our own problems," replied Captain Morrison, who had joined the meeting. "We value your friendship, and we hope to learn much from your experience. But we need to know we can depend on each other when things get difficult. That knowledge can only come from facing difficulties together." Admiral Bennett stood and offered what the humans called a handshake to each member of the alien delegation. "We hope you will remain as observers and friends. We promise this conflict will be conducted according to civilized rules, and we will welcome your continued presence in our system. But the fighting will happen as scheduled." The meeting ended with expressions of mutual respect and genuine friendship. The humans departed for their ships while the Confederation delegation remained behind, trying to understand what had just occurred. In over 2,000 cycles of diplomatic service, Crixval had never seen anything like it. The humans were going to war by choice rather than necessity. They were rejecting peace because they preferred to fight, and they seemed to expect their alien friends to watch and approve while they destroyed each other over rocks floating in empty space. It was impossible, but it was happening anyway. The stars looked different from this distance, but Ambassador Crixval had seen stranger things in his long life, as a diplomat for the Zalathi Confederation. His ship floated silently beyond the ice world called Pluto, watching a yellow star that housed something the galaxy had never seen before. The readings were clear and the science teams had checked them dozens of times, but the results still seemed impossible. There was a species down there that had built machines capable of crossing the void between worlds. They had cities on multiple planets and ships that moved faster than most civilized races had managed in their first 1,000 years of space travel. The energy signatures showed technology that matched what the Confederation had achieved after centuries of peaceful cooperation between 12 different species. Yet these beings had done it all by themselves, in what appeared to be a few hundred rotations around their star. Crixval adjusted his breathing apparatus and looked at the data, screen showing the third planet from the star. His aquatic body needed constant moisture, but his mind needed to understand what they were seeing. The Nethys species had been diplomats for the Confederation for over 2,000 cycles, and he had never encountered anything like this. "The patterns are consistent across all monitoring stations," said Zach 9 from his position at the scanning array. The insectoid Threx was one of the best technical analysts in the fleet, and his compound eyes could process data streams that would overwhelm most other species. "They call themselves humans, and they have spread across 5 worlds in their system." Harmonic 7th hummed a note of curiosity from her crystalline form. The Valori communicated through sound and light patterns that made their thoughts visible to anyone who understood their language. Her translation came through the ship's systems as words, but Crixval could see the musical colors dancing across her surface. Their technological advancement rate suggests either outside assistance or an unusual approach to problem solving. The observation had been going on for 3 local months, and the picture was becoming clearer with each passing day. The humans had built cities underwater like the Nethys and deep underground like the Skorak. They had flying cities in their sky and rotating stations in the void around their worlds. Their ships moved with purpose between planets, carrying goods and people in numbers that suggested a population in the billions. But there were signs of something else. The monitoring stations had detected weapons signatures that seemed far too advanced for such a young species. Not just defensive systems, but tools of war that could crack planets if used incorrectly. The energy readings showed they had learned to split atoms and harness the power of stars. Themselves, Captain Jake Morrison commanded one of their exploration vessels, called Terra Nova, and his crew had been mapping the outer regions of their system for months. Dr. Lisa Carter worked from a research station near their 4th planet, studying what she called xenobiology. The humans were actively looking for other life in the universe, and their search methods showed they expected to find it. The Confederation had protocols for first contact with new species, but those protocols assumed the species would be peaceful, or at least reasonable. Every member race had joined after going through what they called the Enlightenment phase, where violence was abandoned in favor of cooperation and shared resources. War was something that happened to primitive species who had not yet learned to think beyond their own immediate needs, but the humans presented a puzzle that kept the observation teams working around the clock. They showed signs of advanced civilization with art and music and literature that spoke of deep emotional understanding. Their science was elegant and their engineering was brilliant. They cared for their young and their old, and they had systems to help those who could not help themselves. At the same time, the energy signatures showed military installations on every world they inhabited. Not just defensive positions, but offensive capabilities that could project force across their entire system. Ships that were clearly designed for battle moved alongside vessels meant for exploration and trade. It was as if they had achieved civilization while somehow keeping the tools of their primitive past. The most puzzling part was happening right now, in the space between their 3rd and 4th worlds. 2 groups of humans were gathering fleets in the asteroid fields that orbited their star. The Colonial Alliance controlled the inner system, while the Free Mars Coalition claimed the outer worlds. Both sides had been talking for months about mining rights and territorial boundaries, but the conversations were getting more heated with each passing day. Commander Ryan Hayes led the colonial fleet from a massive ship that carried enough firepower to level a continent. General Katie Walsh commanded the Martian forces from an equally impressive vessel that could house thousands of crew members. The 2 fleets faced each other across millions of kilometers of space, filled with rocky debris that both sides wanted to claim. The Confederation observers watched the buildup with growing alarm. This looked exactly like the preliminary stages of the wars they had studied in their historical databases. Primitive species often fought over resources before they learned to share them efficiently. The typical pattern was for diplomacy to fail, followed by violence that continued until one side was completely defeated or both sides were too damaged to continue. Dr. Carter had published papers suggesting that conflict over asteroid mining could be resolved through cooperative agreements and shared technology. Captain Morrison had submitted reports to his government recommending joint operations between the 2 human factions. There were dozens of voices calling for peaceful solutions that made perfect sense to anyone willing to listen. But the fleets kept growing larger, and the rhetoric kept getting stronger. Both sides spoke of honor and independence and the right to determine their own destiny. They talked about resources and territory, and the future of human expansion into the galaxy. None of it made sense to observers who had solved similar problems through simple conversation and mutual agreement. Ambassador Crix Val made the decision that would change everything. The Confederation had waited long enough to understand. These humans and the situation was clearly moving toward violence that could destroy a promising species before they had a chance to join the galactic community. It was time for first contact and proper diplomatic intervention. The humans were about to learn that they were not alone in the universe and that there were better ways to solve their problems than fighting each other in the cold darkness between worlds. The months that followed first contact created a paradox that challenged everything the Confederation understood about civilized behavior. The humans continued their war preparations while maintaining perfectly normal diplomatic relations with their alien guests. It was like watching someone build a fire while discussing the weather with their neighbors. Ambassador Crixval found himself invited to dinners aboard human vessels where the conversation ranged from poetry to philosophy while weapon systems were being installed in the next compartment. Commander Hayes showed him around the colonial flagship, pointing out improvements to shield generators and missile arrays. With the same enthusiasm most species reserved for showing off art collections, the humans seemed genuinely puzzled by alien distress over the coming conflict. Captain Morrison gave guided tours of human exploration vessels to Zach 9, while explaining that the war would probably last a few weeks, and then everyone would get back to normal activities. Dr. Carter shared detailed biological databases with Harmonic 7th, while mentioning that she was looking forward to studying combat stress responses in zero-gravity environments. "You do not understand?" Crixval said during one of many emergency consultations with his delegation. "They speak of war as if it were a sporting event or a scientific experiment. They show no hatred for their enemies and no fear of the consequences." General Walsh had demonstrated new Martian battle tactics to the alien observers using miniature ship models and holographic displays. She explained formations and strategies with the patience of a teacher, while her crews loaded weapons that could crack asteroids in half. When Harmonic 7th asked why such destructive tools were necessary, Walsh seemed genuinely confused by the question. "How else would we test our resolve?" Walsh had replied. "Anyone can say they believe in something, but words are just noise in the void. Action under pressure reveals true character, and that knowledge is worth any price." The Confederation observers watched weapons testing that defied their understanding of proportional response. The humans had built missiles that could adjust their yield from ship disabling to planet cracking depending on the target. Energy weapons could slice through armor or deliver precise surgical strikes that disabled systems without killing crews. It was technology designed for graduated warfare rather than total destruction. More disturbing was the obvious enjoyment the humans took in their preparations. Lieutenant Commander Nick Davis coordinated fleet exercises with the enthusiasm of someone playing complex games. His three-dimensional battle simulations covered millions of cubic kilometers and involved thousands of variables that changed in real time. When the exercises ended, both sides critiqued each other's performance with detailed analysis and suggestions for improvement. Colonel Jenny Wright led stealth fighter squadrons that could appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Her pilots trained for combat scenarios that seemed impossible until they executed them with precision that left alien observers speechless. Wright spoke of her crews with obvious pride while describing tactics that would terrify any rational being. The strangest part was how the humans maintained their friendships across the battle lines. Officers from opposing fleets met for meals and conversation when their duties allowed. They exchanged technical information about non-military subjects and collaborated on research projects that had nothing to do with the coming war. They acted like members of the same family who happened to be on different teams for an upcoming game. Dr. Susan Blake served as a war correspondent for the Human News Networks, and her reports treated the conflict like a fascinating, natural phenomenon worthy of careful study. She interviewed pilots and engineers and tactical specialists from both sides with equal enthusiasm. Her questions focused on technical details and strategic considerations rather than political motivations or personal grievances. "The humans appear to have evolved specifically for warfare," reported Gorth Prime. After weeks of studying their preparations, the Skorak military advisor was one of the few Confederation members with any combat experience, and his analysis was deeply troubling. "Their reflexes and coordination and spatial reasoning are optimized for three-dimensional battle. Their technology reflects thousands of generations of refinement in tools of conflict. The weapons themselves told a story that made no sense to peaceful observers. Human ships carried armaments that were elegant and efficient and obviously designed by minds that understood violence at a fundamental level. But the same ships also carried medical facilities that could treat injuries from any conceivable weapon and communication, systems that prioritized rescue operations over tactical advantages. Major Pete Collins led boarding parties that trained for hand-to-hand combat in zero-gravity environments. His Marines practiced with weapons that could function in vacuum or atmosphere or underwater, while wearing armor that could keep them alive in conditions that would kill most species instantly. They moved with the fluid grace of natural predators while maintaining strict codes of conduct regarding prisoners and civilians. The aliens requested permission to observe training exercises, and the humans agreed with the cheerful hospitality they showed to all their guests. What the Confederation delegates witnessed challenged their basic assumptions about the relationship between intelligence and aggression. The humans fought with creativity and coordination and tactical brilliance that suggested warfare was not a failure of civilization but an expression of it. Captain Amy Ross led fighter squadrons through asteroid fields at speeds that should have been suicidal. Her pilots navigated three-dimensional mazes of spinning rocks while engaging in mock combat that tested reflexes beyond anything the aliens had seen. When asked about the risks, Ross laughed and said the real battles would be much more interesting than the practice sessions. The human approach to military logistics was equally incomprehensible. Both fleets maintained supply lines that could support extended operations while keeping their crews comfortable and well-fed. They had entertainment systems and recreational facilities and communication links that let soldiers talk to their families between battles. It was as if they expected war to be a normal part of life, rather than a catastrophic breakdown of social order. Admiral Bennett and Commander Hayes met regularly to coordinate details that had nothing to do with fighting. They established protocols for prisoner exchanges and medical assistance and salvage operations that would follow the battles. They agreed on communication frequencies for emergency situations and safe zones for rescue vessels. They planned for war with the same attention to detail most species devoted to peaceful cooperation. The Confederation Emergency Councils met daily trying to understand what they were witnessing. Every member species had historical records of primitive conflicts from before their Enlightenment periods, but nothing in those records suggested that advanced civilizations could wage war while maintaining friendship and cooperation and mutual respect. Perhaps we should withdraw, suggested Harmonic Seventh. During one particularly frustrating session, our presence seems to make no difference to their behavior, and witnessing this conflict may damage our understanding of civilized conduct. But Crixval refused to abandon the observation mission. The humans had become friends and allies despite their incomprehensible approach to problem-solving. Whatever happened in the coming battle would reveal something important about this remarkable species. The Confederation needed to understand what they were dealing with before deciding how to respond. The war was coming whether the aliens approved or not, and the humans seemed to expect their new friends to watch and learn something important. The Battle of Ceres Station began exactly as scheduled, and the Confederation observers found themselves witnessing something that challenged every assumption they held about civilized behavior. The humans fought with a precision and ferocity that seemed impossible for beings capable of art and music and philosophy, but they did it without hatred or cruelty or any desire to completely destroy their opponents. Ambassador Crixval watched from the observation deck of his ship as two massive fleets engaged in combat across millions of cubic kilometers of space around the largest asteroid in the human system. The energy signatures were staggering, and the tactical complexity required processing power that strained even Confederation computers. Yet the humans coordinated their movements with an elegance that made warfare look like a deadly form of dance. Captain Amy Ross led the first wave of colonial fighters through an asteroid field that no sane pilot would attempt to navigate at normal speeds. Her squadron moved through the spinning rocks at velocities that should have been suicide, while engaging Martian defenders who were equally skilled at impossible maneuvers. The aliens watched ships dodge obstacles by margins measured in centimeters, while firing weapons with surgical precision. The tactical displays showed battle formations that shifted and flowed like living things, responding to threats and opportunities that changed from moment to moment. Lieutenant Commander Nick Davis coordinated 3 separate engagement zones while maintaining communication with rescue vessels and supply ships and command centers scattered across the combat area. His ability to process multiple data streams simultaneously exceeded anything in Confederation military records. What horrified the alien observers was not the violence itself, but the obvious enjoyment the humans took in their deadly game. Admiral Bennett smiled while maneuvering her flagship through a maze of enemy fire that should have terrified any rational being. Her crews cheered when particularly difficult shots found their targets and groaned when skilled opponents escaped destruction through clever tactics. Commander Hayes actually complimented enemy pilots over open communication channels while trying to kill them. His voice carried genuine admiration when Martian squadrons executed maneuvers that surprised him, and he offered tactical advice to younger opponents who made obvious mistakes. It was like listening to a teacher provide instruction during a lesson that happened to involve weapons capable of vaporizing entire cities. The Skorak military advisor Gorth Prime had seen combat before, but nothing in his experience prepared him for watching humans fight. They have turned warfare into an art form, he reported to the emergency council session that convened while the battle raged. Every movement is calculated for maximum effect with minimum waste, and their coordination suggests a level of tactical evolution that should require millions of years to develop. Colonel Jenny Wright led stealth attacks that appeared impossible until they succeeded with devastating effectiveness. Her fighters materialized from empty space to strike targets that thought they were safely hidden behind asteroid cover. The attacks were surgically precise and designed to disable, rather than destroy, but the psychological impact on enemy forces was obvious even to alien observers. Major Pete Collins commanded boarding parties that fought hand-to-hand combat in conditions that would kill most species within minutes. His Marines moved through damaged ships in zero gravity, while wearing armor that could function in vacuum or toxic atmosphere or underwater environments. They fought with weapons designed for close-quarters battle while maintaining strict protocols for prisoner treatment and civilian protection. The medical response revealed another aspect of human warfare that made no sense to peaceful observers. Both sides prioritized rescue operations that put their own forces at risk to save enemy wounded. Hospital ships moved freely between battle zones under agreements that both fleets honored, despite the obvious tactical disadvantages. Dr. Blake documented cases where human soldiers shared medical supplies with opponents who had been trying to kill them moments earlier. The weapons technology displayed capabilities that exceeded most Confederation military hardware despite humanity being centuries younger than any member species. Energy beams that could adjust their effects from stunning to vaporizing depending on the target and the tactical situation. Missiles that could change course multiple times while tracking targets through three-dimensional space filled with obstacles and interference. But the most disturbing aspect was how the humans maintained their humanity while fighting with inhuman skill. Pilots who had been trying to destroy each other paused to assist in rescue operations when ships were damaged beyond repair. Crews shared food and water with prisoners while planning the next phase of attacks against their home bases. It was as if they could switch between friendship and warfare without any psychological transition period. Harmonic seventh recorded sound patterns that revealed emotional states the Confederation had never encountered before. The humans experienced something that combined the joy of athletic competition with the satisfaction of creative expression and the pride of professional excellence. They were not fighting because they hated their enemies, but because they loved the challenge of matching skills against worthy opponents. This is not warfare as we understand it, reported Zach 9 after analyzing hours of combat data. They are using conflict as a form of communication that establishes relationships and tests capabilities and creates bonds between opponents. The violence is real, but the purpose is social rather than destructive. The battle continued for 3 weeks with pauses for rescue operations and supply runs and crew rest periods that both sides coordinated like participants in an elaborate sporting event. The Confederation observers documented weapon effects that could have ended the conflict in hours if either side had chosen total war rather than this strange form of limited engagement. Admiral Bennett commanded operations that demonstrated tactical brilliance while showing obvious concern for minimizing casualties on both sides. Her forces captured strategic positions through maneuvers that isolated enemy units rather than destroying them. When Martian crew surrendered, they were treated with respect and provided with comfortable quarters and communication access to their families. Commander Hayes led counterattacks that were equally sophisticated and equally restrained. His tactical responses showed deep understanding of enemy capabilities and limitations, but focused on proving points rather than achieving decisive victories. When colonial forces found themselves in impossible situations, they surrendered with dignity and received treatment that exceeded most Confederation standards for prisoner care. The strangest moments came when the fighting paused for coordination between opposing forces. Both sides worked together to search for missing pilots and to provide medical assistance to severely wounded personnel and to prevent civilian casualties when the battle moved near populated areas. They fought each other with deadly efficiency and then immediately cooperated to deal with the consequences of their actions. Dr. Carter published research papers during the conflict, analyzing combat stress responses and tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. Her data showed that humans actually performed better under the stress of life-or-death situations than they did during peaceful periods. The adrenaline and danger seemed to enhance their natural abilities rather than impair them. The Confederation delegates realized they were witnessing the impossible. The humans had somehow evolved beyond the normal relationship between intelligence and aggression. They could wage war without hatred and fight without cruelty and kill without malice. It was a form of civilization that had never existed in galactic history, and it challenged everything. The aliens thought they knew about the nature of advanced species. When the battle finally ended, it was not because one side had defeated the other, but because both sides had achieved whatever goals they had set for themselves. The aftermath would prove even more incomprehensible than the fighting itself. The war ended on a Tuesday morning when both Admiral Bennett and Commander Hayes simultaneously declared their objectives achieved. The Confederation observers had expected to find traumatized survivors picking through the wreckage of their civilization, but instead they discovered something that defied every theory about the aftermath of armed conflict. Ambassador Crix Val requested an urgent meeting with both human leaders, expecting to begin the long process of mediated peace negotiations that typically followed primitive warfare. The standard protocols involved extensive discussions about reparations and territory, and the prevention of future conflicts through carefully monitored agreements. He prepared psychological counseling resources and economic assistance programs that had been successful, with other species recovering from devastating wars. What he found instead challenged his understanding of cause and effect in ways that would require years to fully comprehend. Admiral Bennett and Commander Hayes were sharing drinks in the observation lounge of the colonial flagship, while reviewing tactical recordings of the battle with obvious enthusiasm. They discussed successful maneuvers and clever strategies with the appreciation of craftsmen admiring excellent work. The asteroid field assault was brilliant, Hayes said while pointing to displays showing the Martian attack that had nearly succeeded in capturing Ceres Station. I never expected you to coordinate that many moving parts while maintaining stealth protocols. Our defensive response barely held together. Bennett laughed and gestured toward recordings of the colonial counterattack that had ultimately secured the strategic position. Your fighter screen adaptation forced us to completely revise our approach 3 times during the engagement. Captain Ross deserves recognition for those impossible maneuvers through the debris field. Dr. Elizabeth Grant joined the conversation with reports showing casualty figures that seemed impossibly low for such an intensive conflict. The humans had fought with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets, but somehow managed to limit actual deaths to fewer than a dozen individuals on each side. Most combat damage involved disabled systems rather than destroyed ships and crew. Injuries rather than crew fatalities. The Confederation delegation stared at data that made no sense. According to everything they knew about warfare and its consequences, both human factions showed no signs of the trauma and resentment that typically followed armed conflict. There were no demands for reparations or territory or revenge. The defeated forces showed no bitterness, and the victorious forces showed no arrogance. We need to understand what happened here, Crix Val said during a formal meeting with representatives from both sides. The battle is over, but we cannot identify who won and who lost. Your casualty figures suggest this was not a serious military engagement, yet our sensors recorded weapon effects that could have sterilized planets. Colonel Ben Parker and Lieutenant Commander Nick Davis exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations before Parker responded. Both sides won because both sides proved what they needed to prove. Mars demonstrated they could defend their independence against superior numbers and resources. The Colonial Alliance showed they could project force across the entire system when necessary. Dr. Carter nodded agreement while consulting notes from her ongoing research into human conflict resolution. The war was never about controlling asteroid mining rights. Those disputes could have been resolved through simple negotiation, as your people suggested. This was about establishing mutual respect and testing capabilities, and creating the foundation for long-term cooperation. Admiral Bennett stood and activated a holographic display showing the current positions of both fleets throughout the solar system. The ships that had been fighting each other weeks earlier were now coordinating joint operations against asteroid pirates who had tried to take advantage of the conflict. Former enemies worked together with seamless efficiency that suggested years of partnership rather than recent combat. We needed to know how hard each side would fight for what they believed in, Bennett explained to the bewildered alien observers. Words in treaties and diplomatic agreements are useful, but they cannot reveal character under pressure. Now we know we can depend on each other when things get difficult. Commander Hayes pulled up tactical analyses showing how both sides had learned from the engagement. Colonial forces had adopted Martian stealth techniques while Mars had improved their defensive systems using colonial innovations. The exchange of ideas had advanced both factions beyond what either could have achieved independently. Captain Morrison arrived with reports from deep space, exploration missions that were already benefiting from the technological advances developed during the war. New propulsion systems and sensor arrays and defensive measures had emerged from the conflict that would accelerate human expansion into the galaxy. The battle had served as a laboratory for testing concepts that peaceful research might have taken decades to perfect. Major Pete Collins documented cooperation between former opponents that exceeded anything the Confederation had seen between allied species. Marines who had fought hand-to-hand combat in damaged ships now served together on security details protecting civilian installations. The shared experience of battle had created bonds that no amount of peaceful interaction could have achieved. Dr. Flake published her final reports on human conflict behavior, with conclusions that would reshape Confederation understanding of advanced civilization. Humans do not fight to destroy their enemies, she wrote. They fight to understand their enemies and to establish relationships based on mutual respect earned through shared danger. War is not a failure of diplomacy, but a form of diplomacy that uses different tools. The strangest revelation came when Captain Morrison offered the Confederation a formal alliance treaty that had been prepared before the war even began. The humans had planned to invite their alien friends to join their expansion into the galaxy, regardless of how the conflict ended. The fighting had been a demonstration, rather than a decision point. Any species capable of building observation posts that we could not detect would make excellent allies, Morrison explained while presenting documents that offered full partnership in human exploration and colonization efforts. Your technology and our methods could accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. Crixval realized they had been recruited by the very beings whose warfare had horrified them. The humans had used conflict as a form of advertising to demonstrate their capabilities to potential partners. The entire war had been a carefully orchestrated display designed to show alien observers what humanity could offer to galactic civilization. The Confederation Emergency Council met for 3 days trying to understand the implications of what they had witnessed. Every member species had historical records of conflicts from their primitive periods, but nothing suggested that warfare could survive the transition to advanced civilization. The humans had somehow evolved beyond that limitation. They are dangerous beyond measure and absolutely trustworthy, Crixval reported to the homeworlds. They wage war like others make peace, and their friendship is worth any price. They have turned their capacity for violence into a tool for building relationships and solving problems. Harmonic Seventh sang complex melodies that translated into philosophical questions about the nature of civilization and progress. Perhaps peaceful species like ourselves have been missing something important about the universe. Maybe cooperation without the possibility of conflict is incomplete cooperation. Zach 9 analyzed the tactical data with growing appreciation for human ingenuity. Their methods are brutally efficient, but their goals are surprisingly benevolent. They fight not to conquer but to connect, and not to dominate but to understand. It is warfare transformed into something we have no words to describe. The final decision was unanimous, despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. The Confederation voted to accept full alliance with humanity and to begin joint operations throughout the galaxy. The message sent to all member worlds included warnings and recommendations that would become legendary in diplomatic circles. We have found a species unlike any other, They solve problems through controlled conflict and build trust through shared danger. Never fight them because you cannot win. Never betray them because they remember everything. Never underestimate them because they are more dangerous than they appear. Always ally with them because they are more loyal than they seem. The humans welcomed their new partners with the same enthusiasm they had shown for everything else and immediately began planning joint missions that would combine Confederation technology with human tactical methods. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when peaceful species learned to fight and violent species learned to cooperate. Dr. Carter submitted her final report with a conclusion that summarized everything. The aliens had learned about humanity. They are what we might have become if we had refused to choose between civilization and warfare. They kept both and somehow made them work together. The universe is about to become a much more interesting place.